Let's see, let me start with that phrase. So how many phrases do you hear there?
Many.
Many. Okay, well let's start at the top. I would call a phrase there, you know. And again, probably some sort of half cadence, although it could be part of the one chord, but it's an incomplete sounding cadence. And then yeah. Although there's kind of a slight pause in the middle there with the me, you know. But again, it's kind of, if you're looking for four-measure phrases, then you should continue to look for four-measure phrases. Although it is possible to have like 4 + 2 + 2 or something. But let's say that this is one phrase. So what, is that another resting point? Okay, and how would we rest on that?
That sounded like an authentic cadence.
Yeah, it could be some sort of perfect authentic cadence. It just kind of goes down to one chord, but so. From the measure before, you mean? Like from
Well,
the
that
beat
could be
before?
that could be the fifth of the label of the fourth chord.
Oh, yes, could be. To me, it does sound like an incomplete, you know, cadence. Let's say it's playable, it's not a bad idea. And then finally, that's our really final kind of sounding cadence, right? Anyways, I'm trying to make a case for like a 3-phrase period, by the way. So we could say first phrase, half cadence, right? Because it ends on sol. Second phrase, let's use Steve's plagal cadence. We'll say it's an imperfect plagal cadence. And then the last phrase is a perfect authentic cadence. So this would be a 3-phrase period. Okay. So I tend to like these kind of nice, symmetrical, work out really well type of phrases. You know, 2 phrases, parallel. Yeah. But things can get messy a lot in music. So don't always think it's going to be like, you know, 2 phrases and they're parallel and work really nicely together. They're so balanced. You know. It can be different. So this is a 3-phrase period. Okay, what's our next melody?
Those would be contrasting.
Yeah, they're all contrasting. The melodic intervals. Yeah, so this would be a contrasting period. Okay, you see 349? Jules and Madonna. So let me play this one for you. Well, obviously your first phrase is going to be right, that's your first resting point. So we have one phrase ending maybe with some, again, with some sort of authentic cadence. And the next phrase is the same thing. In fact, how alike are these two phrases?
Very alike.
Very alike. Almost identical, except for the quarter note at the end of the first thing, okay? So actually, we would not call this a period, okay? If two phrases are exactly like, in other words, they're a repetition of each other, or like this, where they're so alike it's scary, you know, it's not even funny, then we just call it a phrase repetition, okay? There's no period formed, because no real musical structure is being created if you just say something and then say it again. You know what I'm saying? There's no antecedent and consequent. It's just antecedent, antecedent, or consequent, consequent. So we call this a phrase repetition. Does that make sense?
Is this one where you would do phrase 1A, phrase 1B? Label it. I think that's what the book said.
You know, I would just, like, phrase one, because there's no variation between the two. I think the 1A and 1B is for if there's a slight change between one and the other, yeah. Okay, how about 351? So we've got a lot of music going on there, a lot of different things going on. Let's look for our first phrase. What do you think that's going to be?
After the repeat of this first, at the end of the second.
Well, no, I would go even earlier. Don't get too.
The end of the first one.
Yeah, I think in the first ending we've got our first phrase.
So we have 4 phrases in this?
Huh?
So we have 4 phrases in this one?
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. Right, so that would be one phrase. That'd be one idea. And so if that's our first phrase, what kind of a cadence would you picture at the end of that? With those ones, A and D.
Phrygian half.
Phrygian half? I suppose you could, but
Well, because we're in minor.
yeah, I would just say half cadence, but if you want to put the Phrygian in there, that's okay. I don't think there's any way of knowing. You could, because you've got the note B flat, or G just before it. Wait a minute. No, that's not going to work. Yeah, no, it would work. Yeah, it could be, depending on how the bass moves, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's just say it's a half cadence. And then the next phrase would be... which would be... what kind of a cadence there?
Perfect authentic.
Yeah, probably some kind of perfect authentic cadence. And then the end of the second ending, that actually, I think the end of the first phrase would be, but that A forms a pickup into the next section, or next phrase. Right? So what would you do with that note A at the end of that phrase? What kind of a cadence?
Another half.
Another half cadence, yeah. And then to finish it off, sorry, I slowed down a little bit there. Forgot to repeat the G, but it would be some sort of probably perfect authentic cadence, right? Is everybody on the same page with that? So there's actually a couple ways we can go through this. So we could talk about these as two separate periods. And each of these periods would be parallel, right? Because you've got a first ending and a second ending. And so a lot of the music that comes here is just repeated here with a different ending. And then a lot of the music that comes here is just repeated here, but with a different ending, right? In each case, you get a half cadence and you get a perfect authentic cadence.
And they would be known as phrase 3 and 4. It's not like you repeat phrase 1.
Yeah,
two,
phrase 3 and 4. Yeah, because there's
second.
yeah. The other thing is there's this thing called a double period. Okay. Now a double period is obviously it's two periods stuck together, but you're going to have if we wanted a period here, we could not have a perfect authentic cadence because we can't have a full stop and have some sort of larger structure. You understand what I'm saying? We can't say this is a perfect authentic cadence and we're done if this is going to be part of a larger structure which ends with a perfect authentic cadence. But if we just said maybe this was some sort of imperfect authentic cadence, like let's say the harmony below it we resolved with a first inversion 1 or something like that, then that would be an imperfect authentic cadence and we could continue. And then we could have a double period with, you know, sort of, or actually like a comma, and then a sort of period, but we know we're going to have another phrase with a comma, and then a real period, boom, full stop, exclamation point, whatever, done. That we would call a double period, where you got two phrases with this kind of a phrase structure, where nothing is really complete until you get down to the very end. Make sense? Okay. Now, to get even more mind-boggling, a double period can be parallel too, if the first phrase of each match and the second phrase usually is significantly but not completely. Because again, we have to have that perfect authentic cadence. So, you know, if these two were exactly the same, then we would have a parallel double period. Does that make sense? You now have to look one step bigger. So here we were looking, before we were looking for parallels here and here. Now we're looking for parallels here and here for the double period. Is this one parallel? No, the first period is parallel, but if we look from this first phrase and this first phrase, there's no parallel. This is the first phrase. And this is the third phrase down there. Right? So that's not parallel. So it wouldn't be a parallel double period, it would just be a double period. If, depending on how we harmonize that second cadence there. Now, melodically, it sounds to me more like two separate periods. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Because melodically, it comes to tonic in the second ending of that first phrase. And it's a really definite ending. You can hardly get more final sounding than that. So my gut tells me that it's two separate periods, not a double period. But I think it's open to interpretation. All right, let's look at the...
So, Professor, to one person a phrase, but as a listener, you could hear a phrase segment? I mean, it's different? Is it almost the same thing? Or?
A phrase segment, like a motive? You mean,
Yeah,
like a
but
short-
it ends in cadence, right? What I'm trying to say. You're saying a phrase, but the second part is a phrase segment, what you're saying?
No, what we mean... No.
The first period and the second period.
No, the first period is a period. What I'm saying is, I think it sounds like this is a period. So the first and second endings of the first half is one period, and the first and second is the second half is the second period, and the two are not really related to each other. Because the first one ends with like a final stop. I mean, that's the judgment. So if the first one ends final sounding, then that structure is over. It's done, it's completed. Yeah, Steve?
If we weren't ending the second phrase with a PAC, how can you tell if it's a double period if they're contrasting?
The best way would be if in the melody, you know, if you're looking at the melody, like me is in the melody of this, you know, then you're gonna know. Because, so this one ends with me, and this one ends with do.